So the good news is, if you've done the planning to retire, you should be in a good place, right? But if your assumptions are wrong, your projections are going to be way off, and you may run into the fear of outliving your money. I'm going to share with you 5 common mistakes people make in this video as they go about placing the assumptions into their planning models. But before we get to that, hit the subscription button and hit the notification bell so you can be alerted to when we post new videos. So what I want you to do is think about this for a moment as you start to set up for this next chapter of life, this transition into retirement. Think of it sort of like opening up a new business. Now, with a business, you must plan for a number of different variables in order to be successful, right? What kind of overhead am I going to pay? Rent, or am I going to own my unit? How much marketing am I going to spend? How am I going to price out my goods? What margins am I going to put on them? How much staffing will I have? How will I pay them? All of this has to go into a sense of not only bringing value to our customer as the business owner, but also to sustain our ability to stay in business, 1, and hopefully 2, to thrive, right? In retirement planning, the objective really is to not outlive our money in retirement. That would be thriving, right? But how do we plan for that? And what are some of the mistakes that people make? Now, I've been doing this for over 30 years now, and I think our industry has done a lousy job of educating you in terms of how you need to be thinking about the preparation for a successful retirement outcome. And I'm going to share with you, again, those mistakes from my experience that I've had with my clients so that hopefully you don't step on these landmines either. So the number 1 mistake is people don't spend enough time on their cash flow worksheet. Now, we're going to get into why this is really important to do the cash flow worksheet first before you go to your investments. But I'm not going to deal with that at this time. But remember, in just a moment, how big a mistake that is. But what I want to do is look at the cash flow worksheet itself, because in here, there are 2 common mistakes that people tend to make. And if you're fearful of outliving your money in retirement and you do this cash flow worksheet wrong, things could blow up quickly, right? So one of the mistakes in doing your cash flow worksheet is you don't put in enough of a projection, or the assumptions aren't big enough in terms of how much cash you're actually going to spend. Now, what I mean by that is most people plan for perfect, right? They may not plan for that what-if scenario or something happening around the corner or something that we didn't think about would happen, the uncertain, right? I counsel my clients that whatever number they come up with for their cash flow need on a day-to-day basis, to bump it up like 10%. And then maybe after a couple, 3, 4 years, take a look at it and reassess. But as you're looking into your initial assumptions, bump that number up a little bit. The other mistake people make here, it's interesting. When I ask about how much cash flow they need and they go through all the line items, there's one line item they often miss. And that is, if you're going to generate the income, you're going to have to pay the taxes. So you need to gross up the amount of money that you're going to need. In other words, if you need $5,000 a month for day-to-day, then you bump it up the 10% to $5,500, and then you have to account for taxes. Maybe you have to bump it up to $6,500 or $7,000. But don't make this mistake when filling out the cash flow worksheet, because that could truly upend your ability to retire with confidence. The second mistake is not knowing exactly if you're taking on too much or too little risk with your portfolio. So again, here I think our industry's done a horrible job, right? During your accumulation years, your working years, we've pretty much taught you need to outperform the benchmarks, the Dow, the IFA, the S&P, the NASDAQ. But that all changes when you go to retire. And if you continue to think about it in the old way while you were working, you may have some significant issues with regards to not only your portfolio, but the ability to generate income for your cash flow need. Now, I said a moment ago, doing the cash flow worksheet is more important than doing your investment workup, if you will. The reason I say this is, once you decide how much income you need from the portfolio, and that can only be driven by your cash flow worksheet, right? You know how much you need, right? How much is coming in, Social Security or otherwise. Then you've got some sort of shortfall, which will have to be provided either by working part-time or from your investment portfolio. So if you do it in this way, you sort of take the mystery out of the decision-making process in terms of how much risk to take. If you need $20,000 a year and you have a $500,000 portfolio, then I'll talk about this in a moment, the 4% rule. You can use that 4% rule. 4% of 500,000 is the $20,000 that you need that were a shortfall based on your cash flow need. So now you have to position your portfolio in such a way so that it at least generates that 4% income plus a bit for inflation. So if you think about, let's say, a 4% income plus maybe 2% for inflation, now you have to gear your portfolio to a risk that is appropriate for about a 6%-ish type of return. This is completely opposite to what most advisors and our industry does, which is to say you need to start with the investments. But if you start with the investments and you're going into retirement, you're not going to get the answers, and your projections will more than likely be wrong. Now, I've spoken a couple of times about the number one fear in retirement, which is outliving money, which comes to preparation. And if you really want to invest in something, invest in 2 minutes in yourself. Go to our banner, fill out the quiz. I will score for you which one of the 3 stages of retirement preparedness you're in. I will also get for you the first chapter of my book, Don't Outlive Your Money in Retirement, and a couple of worksheets that will help you gain even more clarity as to whether or not you're on track for this next chapter. Now, I'm going to deal with one of the biggest misconceptions I think people have as they enter into retirement, just after I give you the next 2 most common mistakes. Okay, so please stay tuned. The number 3 mistake that I find that people make is not accounting for a proper amount of inflation. And inflation's really key here. You know, historically, inflation rates have been over decades 4 to 4.5% or so. But lately, it's been closer to that 2.5% number. So if you put in 4% as an inflation, you're going to need way too much money. And as you look at some of these models and they compound out, you know, these 10, 20, 30-year models, that 4% number is going to get very large, and your projection is not going to be close to what reality is going to be. I would strongly recommend that right now you put into your model maybe about 2.5%. If you really want to err and be a little cautious, maybe use 3%. There's another wrinkle here, by the way, and it deals with Social Security. It's a mistake that most people don't understand, and it will make their projections look not the way they should be, not accurate, or in other words, wrong. Okay? So if you go to the Social Security site and you look at your statement, my statement, you will see that they will give you projections in terms of what your benefits will be, but they don't inflate that number out. But there is a way for you to use inflation on their calculator, but here's the problem. They're using 4%. That's going to give you a really false sense of a number that you think you're going to get for Social Security, and certainly your projections are going to be very wrong as a result. So be careful about the inflation number as it relates to how much income you're expecting down the road. All right, I'm going to get to that big one in just a moment. I want to get you this one quickly so we get it sort of out of the way. And the fourth big mistake is longevity. Now, what do I mean by that? Studies show we're living longer than we did before, and the number one growing demographic are those over 85, okay? It used to be back in the day, people would collect their pensions, retire at 65, and maybe live a number of years beyond that and not a lot. But that's all changed, hasn't it? We're living longer, healthier lives, and our money has to be sustained for a much longer period of time. And the mistake I find that people make here is they don't put in the right number for their expected life expectancy. Okay? We use in our planning, we're a little conservative. This may sound a little contrary, but when I say we're conservative, we assume our clients are going to live longer. And what I mean by that is, if our clients are living longer, they have a need for more years of income. So we're sort of building in a buffer here, if you know what I mean. So we typically use like 90 or 92, unless we know, some health issues that are present for either of the clients, and then build that into the plan. But make sure you're putting in the right number for your life expectancy. So let's get to what I think might be one of the biggest ones. It's common mistake number 5. And the mistake is taking too much income from the portfolio. Let me share with you a story I had a number of years ago. A new client who came in who was working with Fidelity at the time, and he said that when he retired, since his portfolio was generating about a 7% total return, that he had planned to take 7% income. That would have been disastrous. Our industry has done studies, and we keep coming back to the same basic number, plus or minus just a hair. What that indicates is that you can take about upwards of 4% of the portfolio so that over time you don't deplete your assets. Now, there's certainly no guarantees in any of this, but do not plan to take out any more than 4%, which also relates to another mistake. I'll give you a bonus mistake right now, because again, I think our industry has done a lousy job here. Are you aware that when you go to retire, if the market is coming down and you're taking income, it's a double whammy. And it's very difficult to overcome. It takes more time once you're retired. And if the markets go down soon after you retire, can you say 2007, 2008, or 2000, 2001, 2002? People who retired in and around those time frames, really, their portfolio took a hammering. Not just because the markets went down, but because they were also needing to generate income from that same portfolio. That can be a true disaster, and it'll certainly make your numbers wrong as you look forward. So those are the common mistakes, and certainly make sure that you take a look at our playlist to see if there are any more issues you need to be taking care of.